Hey everybody, Harold Fisher here again, anchor and host of the Daily Drum on WHUR. I want to welcome you to another edition of HUR at Home on WHUR.com and all of our social media platforms. A hell of a book. Well, just hearing that for readers will definitely perk up your ears. You want to get your hands on a book that people say is a hell of a book. But in this case, it is also the title of the latest effort by author Jason Mott, a hell of a book. Jason is joining us now on HUR at Home Newsmakers. Jason, thank you so much for joining the conversation.
Cool. Thanks for having me, man. Glad to be here.
I should tell our listeners, by the way, that you actually missed out on a treat because we were really clowning Jason before we came on.
They totally disrespected me. Whoever watched it, they disrespected me, man.
Just so much disrespect. But we'll leave that on the side. No shade, because I really want to get into this production that is a hell of a book. Why that title?
It actually came about, my agent suggested that. The whole book centers around this author who is on book tour, and he's written this really big book, and everybody he meets runs into, they say, oh, it's such a hell of a book, such a hell of a book, such a hell of a book. And so my agent suggested we actually call it that because it works in a lot. Like, it talks about the difficulty of writing, like the burden of like being a creative kind of voice. So yeah, it just fit. It was a silly name, but then it started to fit really well.
But it's more than just the speed bumps and the potholes of the creative process. Mm-hmm. I mean, it really does, and it's fiction, certainly, but it does speak to issues that many people of color, particularly black people, are dealing with. Talk to me about some of those issues.
Yeah, so the book, as I mentioned, the framework is an author on book tour. But the reality is about this African-American author as he's traveling across country, trying to like sell his book, going through the process of being this author on book tour. He meets this 10-year-old kid known simply as the Kid. And then as the two of them kind of continue to follow through the narrative, he starts to wonder if this kid is actually real. And in the background, there's all this discussion about a police shooting of a young black kid who seems to have a certain resemblance to this kid that he keeps seeing again and again and again. So the book actually turns into a big discussion on race and identity in America, particularly upon like black people. And the hell of a book is kind of a blank slate for it. Becomes a hell of an experience, like a hell of a ride in terms of the existence of being black in America and all the things that you have to go through just to survive and have your children survive in it and find a way to make them thrive. So that's kind of what the hell portion is actually about. It kind of comes off as a glib kind of name, but it really is about like the challenges of just being black in America and the existence there.
How is being black in America, from your perspective, different from so much of what we're hearing right now? There seems to be a different kind of cottage industry as it relates to blackness in literature and in the arts, perhaps different than what we seen or heard 40 or 50 years ago.
I think what's happening now is there's a different style of voice that's coming out. That's the thing I've seen in the last 10 years. I've been writing since my first novel came out 10 years ago. And one thing I've noticed is there's a big shift in the way that the voices are allowed to represent themselves. There's a much stronger sense of directness, a stronger sense of like scathing satire. Hell of a book it's at times a comedy, it's at times a drama. It borders on this really farcical kind of tone at times. It's a place where I feel like a few years back, this particular style of black storytelling, this particular style of black voices would have had a hard time existing. And I think that's part of the problem with a lot of the challenges of being a literary voice in America of particularly if you're black. Like, the black voice has oftentimes been pushed into a certain box and said, this is the type of story you can write. And we're seeing now is new people writing with the black voice in very new ways. And that's where I think the new wave of black voices is. I think it's great.
Mm-hmm. How do you keep yourself out of the box?
It just, honestly, the best way to stay out of the box is just try to be yourself and stop listening to other people. which is not to say you can't have counsel from friends and people and mentors and things like that. But what happens is eventually, particularly in the publishing process, there reaches a point where you kind of have to decide how much of your Black identity you want to own and still be able to sell books, and where does that fold into? Because, publishers they're about moving units, and I get it, it's a business, and oftentimes they like for people to have a bit more of a neutral stance on topics and politics, because neutrality sells arguably a little bit better than picking a side. And that's the box, it's a trap that I think writers can oftentimes fall into. And so for me to stay out of that, I don't read reviews. I don't listen to my editor and agent very often. If they say something I don't particularly like I've learned to just say the thing the way I want to say it. And that's kind of what this book became for me, which is a really big deal.
Well, the interesting thing about you is that if someone had never spoken to you, had never seen you, and they look at, look at your books, we've got, The Returned, we have The Wonder of All Things, so you have the Crossing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but all of these books are, in a great many ways, completely different. I mean, you got a love story in one case, you've got, fantasy / science fiction in another case, and then you've got, this race story in hell of a book. You're all over the place, and usually when someone says, well, you're all over the place, that's not necessarily seen as a compliment. But for an author to have books that are successful, which are all over the place, how do you do that?
I hope it's a sign of, quality writing. Like, you always try to improve your writing. But I know for me, so much of Hell of a Book was this coming to grips, and this, as we call it down here in the South, this come to Jesus moment, where I had to really pare down what I wanted to say and why I needed to say a certain thing. And the thing is, for me, if you look back at, all of my books, like, they feel different, I think, when you first kind of look at them. But the more you kind of dig in, at least for me on this side of the fence as a writer, I see a lot of similarities. They're all, The Returns, all my other books, they all function on this high imagination, this idea of like, what if the world was slightly different than it is now? And when you get to Hell of a Book, you have this author who his entire world is about this blurring of imagination and reality. Like, he doesn't understand sometimes what's real and what's not real. So for me, all 4 of my novels, they run on this vein of this alternative kind of existence that people have, that creative types oftentimes have. Like, I've been writing so long that I oftentimes do struggle with, like, was that a real thing, or is that something from a story I wrote? And I think that's what I wanted to kind of capture. So I'm glad that readers are kind of coming along with me in this book that is different on face value. It is different. And it's been cool to see old readers stick with me and new readers kind of discover my writing. So that's been really cool. So
what's this, 4 books in 10 years?
Yeah, I'm good for it. Takes me about 1.5 to 2 years to write a book, and then you got to find a home and shop it. So yeah, my first novel was published in 2013, and here we are in 2021. So we're at like 8-9 years, not counting the year it took to ahead of that. So yeah, it's been interesting, man.
Well, yeah, I mean, from the first keystrokes to
where
you are now, we are talking about 10 years or
exactly.
Hardest thing for you about writing?
Hardest thing for me about writing is it's changed a lot over the course of my writing. The hardest thing used to be just the act of writing, just the job of putting words on a page. I think the hardest thing now is understanding the thing I want to really say. Because eventually you reach a point in your writing where, like, you know how to put words on a page, and that part's a little bit easier. But really deciding, like, what is the thing you're going to commit to and the thing you're going to actually say, like, that becomes a very difficult thing. And there's so many things to talk about. Like, there's so many topics that as a writer you want to approach and you want to have your voice examined and you want to have readers follow you through that. There's so many topics that deserve discussion, and yet you've only got 300 pages, or you've only got, just 2 years to do a novel. So you have to pick one thing and really hone in on it. So I think that's the hardest thing for me right now, is really picking the topic and sticking to it and really examining it as deeply as I want to without all the other things I want to examine getting in the way.
Who do you read?
I read a lot of people I've read before. Like, I'm a habitual reader of old stuff. So some of my favorite authors are John Gardner, William Golding, Toni Morrison, Dalton Trumbo, So those, Alice Walker, those are the people that I read and reread and read again and again and again. I just finished reading a few months ago, Matteo Ascaripor's Black Buck, which is actually terrific. Like, I've kind of been able to do some panels with him. He's an awesome dude. So yeah, I read a lot of stuff I've read before. It helps me focus on my own writing a bit.
I often wondered, I think that the danger, having, published a novel myself, the danger that I've always had is, and fear, reading stuff that I like, and always being concerned that anything that I write, that I am not accidentally incorporating or plagiarizing something that because if you read another hell of a book, a real hell of a book, that's some good stuff, and having that consume you emotionally, creatively, is so dangerous.
It is. It's difficult. That's actually why I read old stuff, because the stuff that I've read before, I know, like, if I'm working on a manuscript, I actually try to avoid reading new authors and new stories, because of that exact reason, that it does bleed in if you're not really careful, and it's hard to prevent it from bleeding in, because you'll see something stylistically, or you just fall in love with how they're doing things as an author, and your brain goes, I want to incorporate that and do it as well, which starts to siphon off your own voice and your own style of storytelling. But if you've got things, it's like watching a movie you've seen 1,000 times or a song you've heard 1,000 times, it becomes this autopilot where you're like, it functions in your brain, but it doesn't influence what you're doing in a certain way. But yeah, that's a very real fear. Like, to me, I think it's dangerous to read certain stuff when you're working on new things, because again, it can bleed in. At least that's my experience.
Best advice for all of those folks who believe they have a tale to tell.
The best advice I have, be kind to yourself. Give yourself time to learn to be a writer. Being a writer is a very difficult thing, and it takes a lot of time and practice. And one thing I found is young writers or new writers, they don't get it right the first time, and they get really frustrated and they quit. And I tell them, be kind to yourself. Treat your writing the way you would if, like, someone you love gave it to you. Be nice to it, be compassionate to it, and give it a chance to grow. I think that's the best advice I can give.
For folks who are interested in finding out more about you, your writing, where can they find you on the web?
Sure. You can find me at jasonmottauthor.com. On Facebook, it is Jason Mott Author. And on Twitter, it's just at Jason Mott.
Like the applesauce, M-O-T-T.
Yeah, just like the applesauce without the money, though. That applesauce money.
It's coming.
Yeah. I remember you said that. I'm gonna put that out there. You said
that's right. Put it out there in the universe. Absolutely. Jason Mott, author of Hell of a Book. Thank you so very much for spending some time with us. Congratulations on the new book, and you're going to need to bring it on to DC at some point.
Yes, sir. Will do. I've been up there. I come there a couple times ago. I got a few friends in DC, so next time I come back, and come see you.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Good luck to you.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
That is it for this edition of HUR at Home Newsmakers. I'm Harold Fisher, and as always, I'll see you on the radio.